If you're enjoying the show, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And to everyone who has already subscribed and supporting the show, thank you. It means a lot. Hello and welcome to the Happiest CEO, the podcast built on the belief that success is achieved by design and happiness made by choice. We cover a lot of ground on this channel because there are so many avenues to becoming the happiest CEO of your own life. But today we are stacking the odds in our favor by looking at success through the ultimate foundation, our physical health and resilience. Because having high performance, clear thinking and strong vitality is essential if you want to thrive on your own terms. Which brings me to an important question to ask. What if one of the most powerful tools for living longer, thinking clearer and building resilience, and most importantly becoming happier, isn't another supplement or biohack, but heat? My guest today has spent years investigating exactly that. Bill Gifford is a #1 New York Times bestseller author and award-winning science journalist known for exploring the frontiers of health, human performance, and many other things. You likely know him as a co-author of Outlive with Peter Attia, a book that completely transformed the global conversation around longevity and health span. In his latest book, Hot-Wired, highly recommended, Bill explores the science of heat. He dives into why saunas, warm environments, and controlled discomfort might be some of the most overlooked tools for boosting performance, living longer, and reconnecting with community. What makes Bill's work so compelling is his abilities to separate fact from hype, turning complex discoveries into stories that can genuinely change how we live. And it's a great read. This is a conversation that could change how you think about health, resilience, and longevity. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sebastian. Thanks for that great intro.
It's amazing. So you wrote a book called Outlive, but then somehow you felt compelled to dive really specifically into saunas. Like, what was the trigger for you to spend years on traveling the world, talking to hundreds of people? The sources that you quote are, I think, 10 pages long. So it was a lot of work that you put into it. What was the motivation to give up your time for something like this?
Yeah, I go overboard sometimes when I get obsessed with a topic. And this was something that the idea that sauna has positive long-term health effects had been sort of stuck in my head for about 8 years. I was aware of those studies from Finland that we'll talk about, showing that frequent sauna use over decades improved all-cause mortality and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't really quite know what to make of them. And, you know, on a personal level, like I didn't enjoy being hot myself. I'm kind of a winter guy, or I'd always thought of myself as I like cold weather. And so I kind of put them off to the side. And in Outlive, we looked at them, and Peter and I we basically kind of punted and mentioned them in a couple of paragraphs. It didn't really fit into the framework. But then as I finished that up, I started going to the sauna at my gym, and just to sort of, I just wanted to be warm. So it was winter, and I just started, I just felt good in there. I felt comfortable, and I felt kind of happy and relaxed afterwards. And I thought, okay, there might be something here. And then I got a magazine assignment from Men's Health to do a little piece on the science of sweat, how we evolved to sweat, and how athletes use heat adaptation to improve performance, similar to altitude training. And so that kind of all meshed together in a kind of an interesting story about humans, how humans respond to heat and how we're sort of uniquely suited for hot environments, and we can benefit from hot environments.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And what was the most surprising thing that you sort of found while doing that? I mean, you traveled the world, you went to Europe multiple times. I believe your wife has a connection to Finland, which really must help a lot.
Yeah. Her grandmother came over to Finland as an infant, and so we still have the Finnish family Bible, which is about a foot thick, with all the births and deaths and everything. And it's kind of this interesting connection to the place. But what was the most surprising thing? I think the most surprising thing to me is that humans can adapt to some pretty uncomfortable hot situations, hot climates. We're very adaptable. And I hadn't ever really thought about that in terms of the heat. In fact, I grew up in a hot place. I grew up in Washington, D.C., very steamy, very swampy. I never liked hot weather, humidity. And so I kind of spent my life trying to avoid it. But then it turns out that we can adapt to heat if we're exposed to it in a consistent, intelligent way. And so our physiology around heat changes completely over consistent exposure. And so that was the biggest surprise to me, how flexible we are.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of biohacking, a lot of biohacking is about finding the perfect environment, the perfect situation for you, right? Everything has to be optimal for you. But in fact, we're really resilient and strong. So we can handle an environment where we can adapt to an environment that is potentially dangerous.
I'm amazed how you make the connection for something that is sort of like saunaing and wellness is something that people see as something for them, for their own health. But you made the connection also to like our climate is changing, therefore it will get hotter. That's a problem for especially the elderly, but actually with anyone. But if you do certain trainings, which I'm amazed how quickly you can actually adapt. If you do a couple of weeks of that, it wouldn't be as bad as at what we have seen in the heat waves in the early 2000s in France. I remember I studied climate change. Yeah. And so I looked into that as well. And reading you making this connection, unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Heat waves are actually not the most dangerous in the hottest parts of the world. They're actually the most dangerous in places like France, as you mentioned. Europe just had a big dangerous heat wave. Places where people are not accustomed to hot weather, not as accustomed. And also, their infrastructure, they don't have as much air conditioning, which can it's a double-edged sword, but it can be a problem. So there are images of hospitals in Germany, I think, without air conditioning, which seems just kind of crazy. But it's true. I mean, as the climate gets warmer, we need to be thermally flexible, right? I think that it's important. And, sauna is a useful tool to build up that heat tolerance. Basically, as I put it, colloquially, it was like my goal was to kind of make climate change suck a little bit less.
Yeah, and you really put yourself through quite a bit there, I have to say. I mean, I understand that, like you were citing other people doing it like in mines back in the days, that instead of miners going on the first day down into the mines and the heat was just too overpowering and people died, going into a tent for 6 days and having the option to get in and out is one thing.
Yeah.
But looking like you going to Huggy Bear. His name is Dr.
Huggy Bear. Rob Huggins.
That's how you call him in your book. Yeah. And pushing yourself to actually endure a lot of heat. Yeah, I really admire that you went to that extent.
Yeah. So that was I did what's called a heat tolerance test, where they put you in basically a heat chamber, like a little oven the size of a room, and you do some exercise, you do some activity, like you work on a treadmill, or sometimes they have people like pick up boxes and move them like you're in a warehouse, so they do this testing on workers as well. And then they just see what happens to your core body temperature over time. It's usually an hour. And if your temperature goes up and then kind of plateaus, then you have some ability to regulate temperature. So you're heat tolerant, they say. But if you're not heat tolerant, as I was not, your temp goes up and up and up. And, I have a picture of myself on this exercise bike, my tongue hanging out, and I'm just feeling like I'm going to die. But the interesting thing is this science is 100 years old, and it did, as you alluded to, originate in the gold mines of South Africa because, they had sort of racistly assumed that every black worker could tolerate the heat because they're from Africa. But that turned out not to be the case. And it was tremendously hot down there. And so they realized they needed to test these guys and see, and then the ones who were less heat tolerant needed some preparation, special training. Like you said, like an hour a day of working in a heated tent, and then you build up that tolerance, and then they were safe to go work, and then cut the death rates dramatically. And also, kind of birthed a whole arm of modern sports science in physiology.
When I think about sort of heat waves and who normally suffers the most, it's normally the elderly or sick people that suffer the most and potentially also die. Thinking about the Finnish study, which I think initially was 2,100 people, I can't quite remember, they have extended it since, but that really says, you do live, I always say, on average 10 years long. It's not quite as clear cut, but you certainly cut mortality in 50%, I believe, per year. I don't know what that exactly equates to. I think, yeah, right. And that includes a lot of people who are probably over 60, 70, considered the elderly. So would you support that, if looking at the study and looking at the Finns, and you talk quite a bit about that in your book of how they're also people that are way into their 70s and so on, these would not be affected by a heat wave if, because they are using saunas.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think, heat tolerance in the elderly is an interesting, and middle-aged and older I'm talking about, so including myself, middle-aged, is an interesting topic. It's not really studied enough, but our heat tolerance does diminish with age, and our sweat rate goes down with age, and so we're less good at cooling off. But it turns out that it's correlated with two things. It's correlated with cardiorespiratory fitness as measured by VO2 max, and also with this heat tolerance phenomenon that I've been talking about. So those two things really kind of can return the heat tolerance of a older person to younger levels. It's almost like a fountain of youth. So older people who are aerobically fit and have done a little bit of that heat exposure, actually, they do fine. They're fine. They thermoregulate just like a younger person.
Yeah. Are there any health benefits that you have observed in saunas that surprised you? I am aware that the science is still out on quite a bit of that. I found it's not conclusive whatsoever when it comes to that, but I'm sure, like, you must have observed some things that you say, like, it really points to other benefits that maybe we can't back up with research yet.
Yeah. Most of the benefits of heat exposure, and I'm talking about sauna, I'm talking about also infrared, and I'm also talking about hot water immersion, which AKA a good old hot tub.
Yeah.
So that has directionally, a lot of the same benefits. So mostly cardiovascular. That's the biggest sort of sector of benefit. But the interesting one to me was this effect that was observed on Alzheimer's disease and dementia risk over time. Yeah. So this big Finnish cohort study that we're talking about, it was really a heart disease study. They were trying to figure out why middle-aged Finnish guys were dying of heart attacks. And then decades later, researchers went back and said, well, what about sauna? Because they had done a big risk factor, a lifestyle survey, 10 pages long. And so let's see let's match the sauna use and the outcomes. And the people, mostly men, all men in this study, who used sauna the most had the fewest heart attacks. But they also had less Alzheimer's disease by a dramatic percentage. It was like 1/3 the rate of Alzheimer's disease, which is, that really gets my attention because, it's hard to prevent Alzheimer's disease. It's hard to treat Alzheimer's disease. And also, even more interesting, there was a separate study involving a whole separate group of people, also in Finland, that found a similar directional effect, preventive effect of sauna use on Alzheimer's risk. So that tells you that there might be something there. There might be some good signal there for heat therapy and brain health and prevention of dementia that I should be looked at, I think.
Yeah.
And is being looked at, actually. There are a couple of clinical trials going on that are
wow, that's wonderful.
Kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And is that most likely linked to the expansion of the vessel dilation, the expansion of the blood vessels that might trigger that?
Yeah, it could be a number of things. It could be better vascular health in the brain. That's which we know is critical to staving off dementia. You need to keep the vasculature healthy. It could also be at a sort of deeper cellular level, these heat shock proteins that are activated in response to heat stress. And so the heat shock proteins are kind of like little cellular repair team or like house cleaning team, right? You call the house cleaning team to the cell, and they tidy things up and they get rid of stuff that's broken, like old proteins that are broken, and they get rid of perhaps some of these aggregated proteins that are associated with, that are part of Alzheimer's and dementia pathology. There's a story actually in the New York Times about this guy named Doug Whitney, who had, he had the genetic mutations, specific genetic mutations that would have meant that he would have had full-on Alzheimer's by the time he was 60. And a lot of his relatives did, because they had this same mutation that was dominantly inherited. And he's in his late 70s and he's fine. And it's because he has this high, well, it's maybe not because, but researchers think it might be because he has a very high level of heat shock proteins in his blood, because he worked for decades in the engine rooms of ships. Wow. So hot environments. I mean, maybe not an ideal working situation, but it had a little side benefit of possibly preventing Alzheimer's disease. So there's really, I think, something there that needs to be looked at more deeply.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. While we're on the science of it, I remember you talking also about an increase in growth hormones of about 16% after a few days of saunaing. Why are growth hormones good for us? And I don't know enough about it. So I was just wondering whether you could explain me sort of what that would hint to, what it could do for us.
Well, it was actually a 16-fold increase in growth hormone, but this was in young, I think, male subjects, and they had done a sort of a very intense, very hot 30-minute sauna protocol twice a day for, I think, a couple of weeks in this particular study. Yeah, growth hormone is, I guess it's involved in healing. It does some good and bad stuff, but
right.
Well,
you don't want to grow the wrong thing.
I don't want to go down the road of back in the 2000s when people thought that promoting longevity meant injecting themselves with growth hormone.
Yeah,
which
right.
I think is not a great idea. But growth hormone is higher in youth and does some good things, throughout the body as far as maintaining health of certain organs and tissues, and gaining muscle and regrowing bones and all kinds of stuff like that. The good stuff that happens when we're young and doesn't happen when we're older.
Right.
But that's a whole other rabbit hole.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The science of becoming old, I guess.
Sleep increases growth hormone too. Deep sleep, growth hormone is released, and that's part of the regenerative function of sleep as far as our physical health.
Yeah. So, something that I found fascinating, you were talking about an area in Colorado, I believe, where mental health became a real issue, and the connection also that there might be something in it for people actually using sauna. So I don't know if it was heat therapy in general or specifically saunas, but it really helped people for sustaining amount of time to be less depressed.
Yeah. So this was in Vail, Colorado. I was just there a couple of weeks ago, but it's a mountain resort town, a ski resort area, and they went through a bit of a crisis period when they had a number of suicides, and it was clear that the region had a serious mental health problem that was not being addressed because there were only a handful of mental health providers in the county, and they didn't take insurance, that kind of thing. And so the local health system, Vail Health, which has a hospital and has a really well-known orthopedic clinic, obviously, because people break their legs skiing. So they decided to raised millions and millions of dollars from local people. There are a lot of wealthy people, and they donated money, and they have a thriving behavioral health system that they've just kind of created out of nothing for the county. And then on top of that, they're also doing kind of interesting research into things like psilocybin and hallucinogenics for mental health therapy, and also heat. So they're doing a study involving an infrared sauna, but heating people, depressed people up to raise their body temperature a couple of degrees Celsius, so to 101.3 Fahrenheit roughly. And seeing if that has an effect on symptoms of depression, as other studies have indicated that it might. So they're doing that, and then you get heated up. I did this, and it was a tough go. It was a tough session. It was not a fun sauna session by any means, but I got my body temp heated up. Then they tossed me in a cold plunge, and I staggered out the door. Then the next day, I felt good. I was maybe only slightly depressed at the time. And then the next day, I felt terrific. So yeah, they're studying. It's kind of interesting that this study is happening in kind of a remote place. And so I went there as part of research for the book and experienced it. And yeah, that was a surprising thing too. I had no expectation that heat would affect mental health in a positive way. You'd think it might be the opposite.
Do you have a theory why that is?
I don't think I'm smart enough to understand it. Various theories have been floated, ranging from this idea that we all are familiar with in the heat therapy world that a limited period of heat exposure, just like a limited period of exercise, will raise inflammation and then decrease it over the longer term. And there seems to be that kind of effect, and that affects depression. There's something more to it. A really interesting thing that the researchers observed in one of these studies was that they would take these really depressed people and heat them up in an infrared chamber. And then they would start talking. They would get chatty. And so something about the extreme heat kind of took down their inhibitions in some way, and they just started chatting. And the research staff was like, what are we supposed to do with this? They're all of a sudden they're talking.
Yeah.
It's a little bit anecdotal, but it seems to break down some inhibitions.
Yeah.
In an interesting
something
way.
Something that we have been discussing in our company. Dr. Rowley Duncan, the founder of Clearlight, I would always say, look, he tunes his heaters in a particular way and says, I really get as close as possible to what the body would go off, get off. So, sorry, give off. And so one thing that he says that he believes is happening is like when you're in, so that's an infrared sauna, but it would be probably similar to a sauna anyway, is that it mimics sort of like the womb temperature and wavelength of that particular, I think it's 9.4 microns. And so he says like, there might be that. Yeah. What we certainly hear from our customers is that it's their time. They feel really like, the closed room, maybe also psychologically, although the tube is a little bit different to a closed room, is probably not as cozy as a Finnish sauna, but there's all of that might also trigger some memory of safety, because I found things like that.
Yeah, no, and if you think about our ancestry and our sort of where we are as a species, we live in some places that can be. Cold is a bigger existential threat to us in many ways than heat. And so, we don't have fur. We don't have a ton of body hair. We're better suited, weirdly, for equatorial Africa than to Salt Lake City or New Zealand, places where it gets cold. And so I think we're kind of almost programmed to crave heat and warmth. And it's not quite understood, but I think there are some interesting potential connections between temperature sensations and mental states that we're just beginning to understand. So here's a little interesting tidbit that I picked up. So we have these different kinds of thermostats, in some sense cold, in some sense warmth, in some sense changing temperatures, and they have different temperature ranges and they have different names. And there's one particular one, I think it's called TRP-V3. It senses kind of a more or less a pretty good comfort range around body temperature. But this same receptor potential channel is also responsive to incense smoke, which is used obviously in all kinds of ceremonies and meditation and relaxation practices. The same temperature potential of temperature range of a warm bath.
Yep.
It's on the same wavelength as incense smoke.
That is fascinating. Yeah, but I mean, it's so real. I found at the same time. I know you were also talking about ice bath and that there's not much overall evidence that shows that when you're healthy, that really helps the body. What I do find though, and I had a particular episode where my wife just had given birth to our 5th child, and so I had a lot of time with the other 4, and she was quite insulated by the baby bubble. And I should know, but during that time, that was quite tough. I felt quite isolated for a couple of months, and I had an ice bath and was using it sporadically. But as I felt less and less connected and a little bit sort of like lost, and it's like, man, this is not fun, I started to do ice baths, and sometimes multiple times per day. And I would say, and saunas, but especially the ice bath sort of got me out of my head, got me out of these thoughts that I had during that time, and just draw me back into the body. And I would probably argue, look, some of these things are really hard to prove with science, but it did feel good. And it's similar to sort of when I have my aches and pains, sometimes my joints do feel hotter than normal. At that point, look, whether it's real or not, but it feels like the right thing. But I also get it's not always a positive thing when people actually don't have the body or, the mental state to go into the cold.
Yeah. I mean, cold water immersion does force you to kind of, I go like this always, it kind of like, get into yourself and be aware of your body and be aware of your sensations. And oh my God, my legs are numb. And I went a couple days ago with my son and one of his friends, and it's quite hot here now where I live in Utah. It was 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and so it felt really good to just get the core, all that excess heat that had been building up, and kind of, felt a little bit oppressed by the heat. It does get you out of your shakes you out of your loop, and it, some people find it motivating. I think if you want to go down the cold plunge rabbit hole, there isn't as much positive data around cold water immersion as there is around heat. And some of the data that there is suggests that it could have potentially negative cardiovascular effects, and also around sort of athletic performance, like muscle growth and muscle adaptation in response to exercise seems to be shut down by cold. It's also not as great for healing injuries, but it has other uses. I mean, my sort of personal viewpoint is that most places keep their cold plunge sort of too cold, and so you're really getting more pain as opposed to any benefits of that cold shock response. So it becomes sort of performative, and so I find that annoying.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's the same with the sauna, right? I think you were talking about that the Finnish culture, or that the sauna code prevents or doesn't allow people to state a time you have to stay in. I mean, that's where it starts, because I have certainly, I grew up in Germany, and similar to your wife, friends of mine had sauna in the basement, and so you go as a teenager there and try to stay as long as possible. You figure out really quickly that that's not the smartest thing to do, because your body actually knows when it's time to go out. So I do relate to that. But I like that. You go with your body, and I'm sure when you were sitting with the Blister Boys in Finland, for example, it was one of those things where eventually I'm sure you just gave in to your body rather than trying to stand up for longer than 15 minutes in the sauna.
I tried to put on a good showing, for the American team, but I was definitely out of my league. This was in a sauna, a public sauna in Finland, 100-year-old sauna, of kind of a famous place. And the way they do it is they heat up this tremendous, huge stove full of rocks, like a ton of rocks, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's hottest when it opens, and it takes 6 hours to heat the thing up. And so when it finally opens at 2:00 in the afternoon, these guys are waiting at the door because they want it to be as hot as possible. And they're like heat addicts, and they just want it as hot as possible. And, prior to that, my pretty much the only sauna I'd been into was the one in the back of my gym next to the cleaning closet. And it was maybe 160 degrees. Nice. And so this was hot, and it's just the heat had a mass to it. But, over the course of a few hours, going in and out, I kind of got it. Like, that's where it clicked. I kind of accepted the heat, the intensity of it, and there was some quality of the steam that was kind of special, very special. And it kind of, the story kind of all started to make sense. Like I'm starting to understand why this is healthy. And I think it's not just because of the physical effects of the heat, but, after the Blister Boys would go in and out a few times, then they were all sitting in the locker room talking, which it was like, oh, okay. So this is like, for these guys, it's like the men's club.
Yeah, I relate to that. Yes, absolutely. And I think, a couple of things come to mind there really. One small anecdote anecdotal story. I've been in sweat lodges on and off, and that's a long experience. That's normally, I think, a 3-hour one. Don't quote me on that, but it's certainly a long time. And when you were talking about acceptance and you accept the heat, I remember my first one. So sweat lodge, normally a small tent, American Indian inspired or invented. And there's quite a bit of a protocol. Can't go out, can't just drink whenever you want. You have to be given water and so on. So it's quite restricted that way. Makes it more uncomfortable. And I remember I was thinking, the only way to get through this is if I accept that I die. And of course, don't do that at home and don't follow that type of inkling. But I was just thinking, maybe I just give up and see what happens. And when I let go of that feeling of I gotta get out of it, it was quite blissful. And I certainly felt it did something to my mental health by accepting the heat. It sounds like it's a little bit like that when you go into a public hot sauna in Finland.
Yeah. I mean, there's a neurochemical that is produced, and Rhonda Patrick talks a lot about this, but it's called dynorphin. It's related to endorphins, and so that it's like a stress response, and that's the chemical that's telling you to get the heck out of there. Like you're in danger, and it's produced when we're under heat stress, and then so when that creates stress, then when that goes away, or if sounds like you decided to make it go away, then you have this relaxation that happens and this kind of euphoria that happens. The beta endorphins are freed from their cage, and your central nervous system flips from sympathetic to parasympathetic. Sympathetic pulls back. And I think a lot of the beneficial effects of sauna, including some of the cardiovascular effects, could stem from that. It's how it manipulates the nervous system.
Yeah. And if you couple that, then, you were talking about the study participants that, started talking and the researcher didn't know what to make out of it. If I think about it, many customers would have friends over to have a sauna, together, and they would say that's a really nice time. And, normally these conversations are really quite, deep or open. And I think it's partly because you're in a small room, but I think, to your point of the men also talk afterwards, or the people that use the saunas talk afterwards, it probably is this switch in your mental state by using a sauna that allows you to be more relaxed and therefore sort of maybe bring up topics that are more meaningful than, just the surface.
Yeah. I was in a sauna here in Salt Lake City, and I think there was like 6 or 7 guys in there when I walked in, and nobody was talking. And then somebody poured way too much water on the rocks. Yeah. In the States, people are a little bit shy about that. They don't want to do that. But this guy, was a young kid, like 20 something, bucket, ladle on, and it's just, we were just, oh God. And then we got through it, and then everybody started talking.
Yeah, wow.
Ended up having a great conversation.
So it must be a trigger. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there much essential oil used in Finnish saunas? I'm actually not aware of whether
in Finland, I mean, they're very against it, that sort of thing. Only the Germans do that, and they don't.
Okay, that's why
Finns don't do the towel waving and the aufguss and the dancing around and the timers. They just make fun of the Germans. And the essential oils that's an abomination for Don't bring that up to Finnish people. Like,
what?
I think somebody asked me once, is that healthy? Like, well, it's probably not great to have a ton of little oil droplets floating around, but it's probably not a large amount that's getting into your lungs and can smell nice.
Yeah. Yeah. It does feel that type of Lola or steam feels certainly different when there's oil in it. I found that not as pleasant.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah. Something very different. And I liked your term there. I think it was positive body image. Like, no, it helped with I can't remember. I thought I wrote it down, but I can't find the note. But you were saying that, because people are all sort of like equal, and, I do prefer, the nude idea from the point of view that when you're used to it, when you go to a sauna where you can't wear anything, it doesn't take many sessions. Actually, it doesn't take many minutes before you just drop that whole thing of like, oh my God, I'm naked. And it equalizes, I think, and maybe that also helps connecting with people. We say like, we're actually pretty similar here. And yeah.
And you don't have any, polyester plastic fibers next to your skin. It's just kind of more comfortable. Yeah, I quite like it. It's for cultural reasons. That's something that's been left by the wayside as sauna becomes popular in the United States, and I assume in Australia.
Yep, definitely.
Weirdly, we're less uptight than the Germans around that. I don't know.
Oh, it has changed that too. It must be the time.
Really? Okay. Yeah, no, I'm in Finland, their saunas are sex segregated, so there's a men's side, a women's side, and it was easy to get used to, and it was a little interesting, sitting outside this one particular sauna outside Helsinki is kind of a private club. It's like a bunch of naked guys sitting out there on benches on this little island, essentially. And then people are walking by on the ice, walking their dogs. And we're like walking down the pier to jump in the waters.
It's not a bad thing.
It was funny.
I think it's a really good thing.
No.
Yeah.
No, and it is a great equalizer. I think there are all kinds of sayings about how, nobody brings their wallet into the sauna. And also, one thing I noticed there was, nobody was there to show off their lats or their gym body. That wasn't really the point, which was also nice.
Yeah. And I have the hope that, maybe people do, buy a product or go into the sauna for the health reasons initially, but they stay for the company or they stay for that community. We see it a lot, especially in the UK at the moment. There are lots of communal saunas popping up at the ocean front, at the beaches. And it seems, and the younger generation really embraces that type of connecting rather than going to clubs. I mean, sure, clubs still exist, but there's certainly like sort of also a pull towards healthier ways of connecting. And I don't know, it makes me quite happy because, if you think about social media and the world we live in, which is pretty digital, this is sort of a counterbalance that seems to just naturally appear now. And it might be a really good thing.
Yeah, it's very elemental. And, your phone is not going to work for very long that environment. Yeah, I was just in the UK for the British Sauna Summit, and there are hundreds of these little sauna boxes on the beach. I think it's quite wonderful because they have plenty of cold water. And so it gives you a reason to go to the beach in England. In Ireland. Ireland too. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. So have you looked a little bit into sort of the popularity and how that has changed over time? I mean, I see it just from a business point of view that, there's more and more of that. And some people only have heard about it over the last 3 years, but I would say for the last over 13 years that we have been in that field, it's constantly expanding because I think people find something that they really like. It's not a fad anymore. You can really see it's more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. It's definitely more than a fad. I mean, I think there are some faddish aspects, but I mean, if you go back in the day, sauna was, back to like the 60s and 50s, sauna was kind of chic and a little bit sexy and European. And so places like the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas, original casino in Las Vegas, they had a sauna, and people like my partner's family, they had a sauna. It was typical to have a sauna in your basement. And there were still sauna bathhouses in big cities. And then, into the history, the AIDS and the HIV pandemic, part of the response to that was to shut all the bathhouses down. And it kind of never recovered. It took decades to recover from that. And then at the same time, in 1968, Mr. Roy Jacuzzi invented the hot tub. And so that became the new symbol of kind of the good life. If you had a hot tub, you had, it's the same thing. You're in a bathing suit, you're maybe having a couple drinks, you're just relaxing. And so that kind of supplanted the sauna, the more traditional sauna. Now the sauna is coming back, and now hot tubs are kind of uncool. People are ripping out their hot tubs and putting in a sauna in the backyard.
Yeah. Or converting the hot tubs to ice baths.
I don't know if that's an Australian thing. Like, do you guys have hot tubs?
We do. It's still popular.
Yeah,
it definitely is. Yeah. But there is something in saunas, and dry saunas are more popular than traditional saunas, I would say, overall. Maybe it's also the temperature. Yeah. So, and infrared saunas, because the temperature is different, you can withstand also longer times in the sauna than traditional, where it's normally, I think, 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah. And to your point about older people, I think it's more tolerable for older folks who might not want their head to be, broiling hot.
Yeah. And that is something that, like, thinking about it, sort of our founder, Dr. Rowley Duncan, always sort of leaned a little bit on Ayurvedic understanding of heat. Would say, look, we try to have the heat as low as possible, ideally shoulder high, depending on how tall you are, because there is not much benefit in heating your head. That's certainly something that,
it's a design flaw of traditional sauna, which is that your head's in the hottest part of the room. But I've had some people show me some tricks, like you lie on the bench and then you put your feet up, and then that changes the whole thing, the whole experience, the whole sensation. Yeah, it's interesting.
Wow. How are you going with hats? Have you ever worn a hat? And sorry, it's just a side question, but I just wonder, because you mentioned it once in your book and I wasn't quite sure. Is that a thing in Finland still, or is that more like the crazy Germans doing it? Okay.
It's become a kind of almost like a fashion accessory. In fact, I'm going to be shameless here.
Yeah, be shameless.
I actually had some. I like sauna hats because keeps my head gets hot. So I made these hot wired sauna hats, and it's quite a ridiculous look. I don't know why they're this conical shape, but they work. So I had these hot wired sauna hats made. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me on something my grandma had for her teapot to keep it warm.
Well, yeah. But that could be a good other use. It's like a tea cozy for your head. But
so keep it on that unless you go to the sauna.
The Blister Boys wore these, some of them, in Finland. That was the first place I'd really seen them. I was like, "Yeah, okay, you're wearing a hat? What are you doing?" Yeah, and so it's to keep your head cooler.
Yeah, counterintuitive for people who haven't used it. That actually, because it's felt, isn't it? So you would say, oh, it keeps you warmer, but no, it keeps actually the heat out because it's hotter. Outside of your body than anything.
Yeah, it keeps your head at a more constant temperature. Which I think, I don't think it's maybe great for, especially if you're in an extremely hot sauna, to have your head get quite so hot.
Yeah. What temperatures did you go up to in these saunas? Got my
I think the highest number I saw in Finland was 105 Celsius. And, in fairness, even my Finnish companion said, he was like, that's too hot. That's too hot for me. So, it's the way they do these traditional saunas, they heat up the rocks in the morning, and sometimes you overcook it and get it wrong. But then if you don't heat it enough, then it gets too cool and people complain. And people were very picky. It was like wine connoisseurs, if the heat has to be just right. And the quality of the steam has to be just right.
How old do you think that tradition is in Finland?
Man, anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 years. And I thought, wow, that's old. But then I found a paper where these archaeologists had found, they were digging up like old Iron Age forts on the top of hills in northern Spain and Portugal. And they found rocks that had been heated up and cooled and heated up and cooled. And they were sauna rocks. And they were 12,000 years old. They dated them, however, to 12,000 years.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
That is amazing. To me, when you don't have many resources, to put that in building a sauna might tell you something how hot-wired we really are, right?
Yeah. Or how, how much these people craved heat, and how important it was. Who knows? It was probably ceremonial. Heat has been used in medical care since for thousands of years in various ways. Heat and cold, because they didn't have drugs and syringes and things like that. So let's try heat, see what it does.
Yeah, you were hinting also towards that, because it is a space that gets so hot, viruses and bacteria can't not necessarily survive. So there was a place where the Finns would also give birth and of course probably stay healthier in general because of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Finns, Norwegians, there's also in the Middle East, there's the hammam, North Africa, Turkey. I've been in some of those as well. And those were, largely sterile environments. And they didn't even know what germs were, but for some reason, they thought it was a good idea for women to sometimes give birth in these places. It was quite common in Finland up until recently.
Wow. While it's on? Do you think they would have it on?
The sauna.
While they give birth?
Yeah, I think, yeah. Probably not full blast, but
yeah,
it was probably the cleanest room in the house.
Yeah. Yeah, and it feels like that, I found. Even if you go into a cold sauna, there is something about, neutral is the wrong word, but it certainly feels like a coherent place somehow. Like the atmosphere is like, I think it feels clean. Also the smell of wood. Yeah, it feels healthy.
Yeah.
We got into trouble during COVID suggesting that, I had a guest on, that's right. They said, viruses overall do get destroyed by heat. That was enough for us to get actually in trouble with the government. You say in your book that it is, yeah, we had to take it down. And we complied, of course, but it is, and maybe, you can think about while, was that really necessary, or was it just was there a danger that people misunderstood? But you were saying in your book that the COVID virus actually does get destroyed in saunas. Was there a study done? How did you hear about that? I found that really interesting.
That was a finding from, and I don't have the exact study on the tip of my tongue, but this guy Jari Laukkanen, who is the principal author of the large Finnish prospective sauna studies we've been talking about, his group during COVID looked at whether sauna temperatures would kill the COVID virus, and found that it would. Makes sense. It's 190, 200 Fahrenheit,
Yeah.
So it's pretty hot environment. 90 Celsius, that'll do it to most viruses. But of course, during COVID, all the public saunas were shut down. So yeah, for other reasons, but it's kind of interesting that it's come roaring back since then, perhaps as a reaction to the kind of isolation and kind of sadness that we all felt during that time.
Yeah.
It's been a struggle, I think, for a lot of people to recover from that.
Yeah, it really, it jaded
and I think
people out.
Heat has been a tool, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I'm really stoked about that, just from the point of view that I just know how good it feels. It becomes, why do you think it becomes a thing that people keep going back? You're also talking about the hot yoga that you keep going back to.
Yeah.
Is that, do you find that you're definitely hooked and it has become part of your life to sauna?
Yeah. The issue for me sometimes is time, but I'm never, I never regret it. I never say, oh, I just wasted an hour at the sauna. No, it's always this is the best thing I did all day. And yeah, in fact, I was going to go today to an infrared place, and then my day got out of control. So I'm just going to go next week.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to one tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is addictive. And I think, sometimes I joke that, there's this phenomenon where you get a little bit woozy. And I think somebody I talked to said it's like sauna drunk. And I thought maybe this is an ancient way of getting high.
Yeah. It's an alternate,
pushing yourself and then you're changing your mental state.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like a switch. And it always fascinates me going into a sauna and then coming out and can't even remember how I felt going in, meaning it was definitely different and I feel much better. I mean, the vasodilation alone, I would say, like overall, there's just like, as you said, you go parasympathetic, mode, and that all helps, I think, also to really feel very differently afterwards. And it makes so much sense that people who are worried or have mental problems, that is a positive. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely it flicks some kind of switch, and I'm not sure I fully understand it, but there's something kind of interesting that happens.
Yeah. You know what I found interesting? You were saying that only 40% of our sweat, or let's say the moisture on our surface is actually from our body, and 60% is from the Lola, from the steam in the room. That was something I didn't quite know.
Yeah. Of course, some scientists, I think they might have been German, in fact, investigated this with, labeled water so they could tell if it was water that you had consumed or water that was coming from the Lola in the air. But if you think about it, your body is probably one of the coolest things in the room, so it's going to attract condensation. And so not all the water that's, you get covered with water and vapor and moisture in a sauna, not all of it is sweat. In an infrared, it's all going to be sweat, obviously, because there's not a humidity factor. But I was reading, though, an interesting study, and they compared, traditional sauna, infrared sauna, and hot water immersion, hot tub. And people actually sweated the most in the hot tub.
Wow. Is that because the convection, the heat transfer is so direct because you're actually touching sort of the heat source, if you like?
Yeah, I think your body temperature goes up more quickly, and I think there's a sweat response that gets activated.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Changing tech sort of slightly. I remember there are not many definite studies, for example, on detoxification. In fact, it is also hard to really measure. I know Joy Hussein, she wrote her PhD on things like that, reviewed the literature and things like that. What I do know from customer sort of more sort of their stories is that often black sweat is something that happens in the first sort of like up to 10, sometimes 20 sessions that and I've never seen that for me. Hints to me towards like, maybe it's cosmetics that sort of come out of the body and it stops. So it's something that I guess for me, it definitely shows something is coming out of the body. But in saying that, though, you're also saying, sometimes actually things come into the body because of using a sauna because you're so open to it. But yeah, you haven't had a conclusive insight whether detoxification is definitely part of it all?
I say, like, I try to keep an open mind about all this stuff, but, the sort of the standard evidence-based line on that is that, sweating is not a preferential mode of detoxification for the body. So, but, if you have alcohol in your blood and then you sweat, there's going to be some alcohol in your sweat. And also, sweat comes from also not just blood, plasma, but intracellular water. And we have tons of water in our cells, in between our cells. And so, there could be, if there's toxic crap there it'll come out in your sweat. But it's not a primary way of detoxification. But, heat does increase circulation to different parts of the body, and that kind of flushes things out. And, that could accelerate the normal detoxification pathways, which happen through your liver and your kidneys. And so you could, excrete it, to whatever toxins in the usual way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
So not just your sweat, it's going to come out other ways. So when you exercise, that has a detoxification effect, right? It accelerates the removal of bad stuff.
No, that makes sense. And if I think about two scenarios, one is like for people with arthritis, it seems that, vasodilation and an increase in blood flow does help to take the pain indicators temporarily away. And if I spin a little bit further and then think, well, if you have a wavelength or if heat sort of creates resonance frequency with water in your body, it's maybe more an infrared sort of thing. But if it means that the cells, in fact, do exchange better liquids, then, like toxins would come more into the body. But what we always say is like, ideally, you don't want to have it going all the way through your skin, but actually exhale it because it is in your bloodstream, or go through urine and feces rather than actually through your skin.
Right. And, Brian Johnson talks about using sauna to reduce his toxin load and his microplastics load, and he can afford the tests for his system. I think testing sweat is really difficult. It's really quite difficult to collect sweat and test it. But where's I going with this? You if you think about it, like, you're not sweating out microplastics, right? But you might be removing them in some other way.
Yeah. You were talking about herbicides as well, that he found that, which I found interesting.
Yeah.
We did have a customer who was saying
there's a lot we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's interesting. That sort of anecdotally the same as you're sort of like, the Finnish people, as you said, the happiest 7 or 8 years in a row. But you can't really say it's definitely the sauna. But that there's an incline that's probably what it is. We have a customer that sort of had chemotherapy 15 to 20 years ago, and then she started to use sauna. And she said she could taste again that chemical that she hadn't tasted for so long.
Wow.
Like, who knows? But she was certainly saying, like, I know what it tasted because it was really traumatic, the whole experience, of course. And I hadn't tasted this for decades. And it came in the first session. It went away eventually. But she said something happened that made that. Yeah, right. That's, it's hard to measure, of course, things like that. But it is interesting that she pointed that out in her first sessions.
That is interesting.
Yeah, one of those things. So something that I'm burned to ask you, because you've seen the world of saunaing and heat and really dove so deep into it. Where do you think this could go? Like, what is this scenario? Because I can see that people, as we said in the UK, like it becomes really part of a movement, and for younger people, really, really appealing. Like, where do you think the sauna culture can get to for us?
I think it's interesting. It's very niche still. It's
okay.
Certain groups of people do it, and then there's certain groups to whom it's not accessible, haven't tried it. So I think there's a lot of like penetration that still has to happen. But what's interesting to me about sauna as a health intervention is, if you think about the traditional health span interventions, their diet, exercise, sleep. We just started thinking about sleep 10 years ago. And now people are thinking about stress finally, and social connection, and heat and sauna and different kinds of heat exposure kind of enhance all of those interventions across all those domains. So it's like a Swiss Army knife thing that kind of does everything that you want in a health span, and it's easy to do. And so if you think about those Finnish studies that we've been talking about, so those people were not like you and me. Those were not like healthy people. They were kind of rural middle-aged guys. They drank, they smoked, they had bad cholesterol. They were not healthy, and that this intervention had a tremendous effect on their health and their lifespan. So it's sort of like if you can get unhealthy people to exercise, it moves the needle tremendously. So I think normalizing these kinds of heat-based therapies and making them available and accessible, I think, is a potential game changer as far as like as public health. I mean, the same way you have like, if you go to the park and they'll have little exercise stations, right? You can do pull-ups, and you could make saunas accessible in like public parks and public spaces, and have people operate them cheaply and well.
Yeah.
And then we could all be like Finland.
That's right.
So we could all be happy, we could all be healthy.
Do you think it's the saunas why they're so happy?
Probably a lot of factors. I mean, that's an interesting survey. They just ask people in these different countries to imagine a ladder, and then if 10 is the top rung, 10 is the happiest you could possibly be. Like, how happy are you with your life? And the Finns are like, well, we're about an 8, and the Americans are like a 6. And so it's kind of like a feeling of contentment. I mean, sauna could have something to do with it. Certainly. The interesting part is like that, for 4 or 5 months of the year, that's a cold, dark place to live, and they're still happy,
Yeah, and I can see
that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you want that. You definitely want that. And I know the alternative often for Finnish people has been, and I think Norway as well, alcohol, and it's a huge problem. So, if you go into the sauna instead, it's a good idea. Yeah.
Well, sometimes they do both at the same time. Bring a beer into the sauna, which is a terrible idea, but yeah.
But your research showed that, well, that was more around the race that you took in the Texas heat, that in terms of hydration, it doesn't matter too much what you drink. That's at least how I understood you. Like, is that correct?
Well, it was kind of a revelation to see that there is some literature suggesting that the lighter beers and lower alcohol beers can be potentially hydrating, on a par with certain sports drinks and water even. Darker beers, definitely not. Yeah, beer's hydrating. Milk is the most hydrating beverage, but, you're not going to drink milk during a triathlon, hopefully.
Yeah, imagine.
That might not work out.
Being on your bike. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I have a couple of quick fire questions, if you don't mind. Have you seen any sort of benefit or any indication what might be better for people sauning in the morning or at night?
I tend to prefer afternoon or evening, just because I think that's a good way to wind down from the day and get ready to sleep. And I think, when we sleep, our body temperature is the lowest. It's the lowest point of the day. So I think that, and that sensation of lowering body temperature helps us go to sleep. So I prefer sauna in the evening. Cold, you can do that in the morning if you're up for it.
Yeah. No, with you. What do you think sort of is more beneficial or is more desired? Maybe that's easier. Short and frequent or long and intense? Meaning like using it a lot, but short versus like, really pushing yourself.
It takes a lot. A lot of these adaptations depend on body temperature elevation. And so that only happens with a longer session, I hate to say. So if you're really doing it for those reasons, I think a longer, intense session, but, don't be an idiot. Listen to your body. Like,
Yeah.
Don't, drink. You really have to hydrate while you're using sauna, because you can get behind the 8 ball pretty quick as far as like your water levels.
So you drink even in the sauna?
Well, not in the sauna. I mean, that's going a little too far, but like definitely while you're resting, definitely drink, and definitely, that's a time when you want to add some, potentially electrolytes.
Yeah. I think that's a really good advice as well. Electrolytes, because you of course don't only sweat out water, but also salt or sodium.
Yeah.
What's the best longevity habit that you have come across? You've seen quite a bit, talked to a lot of top athletes as well as physicians. Like, can you see anything that's really moving the needle and you think like this is one of the main habits that you would endorse?
Well, besides sauna, which I just wrote a book about, that's how much I believe in that.
Yeah.
I think there's interesting stuff around sun exposure. I mean, that has been a kind of, that's been another sort of rabbit hole of mine. Rowan Jacobson just came out with an interesting book about that, about how the sun does some good things to our bodies. And sunlight actually penetrates deeply into certain tissues. So certain wavelengths of sunlight affect our bodies, not just our skin. And so that's super interesting. That's super interesting to me. So, don't go crazy, especially if you're pale skin like me. But yeah, some sun exposure I think is beneficial, contrary to what we've been warned for decades by dermatologists.
I lived in New Zealand, which has one of the highest UV ratings. And so sun, you get taught at very young age, to do all the right things, like really thick sunscreen, but also sunglasses. And I remember reading a medical study that clearly stated, look, sunglasses trick your body in thinking the sun is not as strong as you think it is, because the photoreceptors in the eye actually do inform your body how strong the light and the sun is. And it was something that struck me, because melanoma is something that's the highest in Down Under because of the UV, but I sometimes also wonder whether there are other, factors like sunglasses or, things like that.
Yeah, I don't know about sunglasses, but, it is interesting that, Australia does have a pretty severe skin cancer problem. And again, this is not fully in my area of expertise, but, there's an interesting sort of observational study from Sweden, and they looked at people's sun exposure levels and cancer rates and found that actually the more sun exposure people had, the less cancer overall they had in their lives. And so that kind of makes you go, there might be more to it. So so that's something that's interesting. The healthiest thing I do in my daily life is I walk the dog in the morning. That's the healthiest. That's like my number one health hack. I'm out at 7 o'clock in the morning, 7:30, sun's coming up. I'm getting that sunlight in my eye. I'm outside in whatever weather. I have a little friend with me, so there's some companionship. And we have friends all throughout the neighborhood. So we talk to people, have a little social interaction. I get a little bit of exercise, low-level walking, and I can either, take on information through a podcast. I was listening to your podcast this morning, or a book, or just nothing, and just think. And often, as far as like my writing process, I'll halfway through the walk, there will come a moment where I'll have to pull out my phone and I'll dictate an email to myself because I just came up with just the perfect paragraph that solves some problem I've been trying to fix. And so it gets the wheels turning in my brain as well. So that's the healthiest thing I do.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it's one of those things, you can pay a lot of money for supplements, but it doesn't have the same effect of actually having a great habit that really like fills up your cup and, does really both. You have great oxygen outside. You connect with people, super important. And you also, your mind can just wander a little bit, which is, I think, many good ideas come out under the shower, but I think going for a walk for sure.
Yeah. Emotional processing, all kinds of stuff happens. It's great.
If you could have a green juice or a beer, I think you like beer, with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
I'd pick Seneca.
Oh, right. You're
the Roman Stoic philosopher. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just kind of want to pick his brain a little bit because, he had a lot of interesting things to say. And he had kind of an interesting relationship with work and success and wealth. He was quite wealthy, but then he would go off and live like a poor person for, weeks at a time. And he, I think we're very attached to like things and possessions, and we're kind of trapped on this hamster wheel of making more money. And what happens if that goes away? Then who are we? So I think he would be pretty interesting, or he might be a dick. I don't know. I guess I'd find out.
Got to find out. That's right. Yeah.
I'm sure he'd be a good hang.
Yeah. Sure. I'm sure you could spend the odd hour of debate and conversation with him. Very cool.
Second choice might be Ernest Hemingway.
Okay, why is that?
He was a doer and also an observer, and I kind of relate to him because he was a journalist, but he was kind of in the arena. He was doing things, and he had this like awesome stripped down style. Also stripping things down to their essence for maximum clarity. So if it had to be a writer, it'd be him. Anyway,
very cool. Thank you. I haven't read much. I have watched a couple movies, but of course that's just adaptations of his writing. Yeah. One thing I actually wanted to ask you about your long Outlive book is, are there any particular things that you sort of adapted? Because that's a really medical and really sort of technical book in many ways. Is there something that you find like, hey, that was an obvious one that I changed as soon as I read about it and researched it in your own life?
The toughest, I have a difficult time sometimes with sleep. And so that to me was the hardest chapter to work on in terms of my own life, because I realized like I'm a really bad sleeper. And, I would in fact lie awake at night while I was working on that chapter, thinking about how badly I'm sleeping. And I'm reading all this stuff about how bad that is for you not to sleep.
Yeah.
So I was like going crazy during that, while I was writing that chapter. So I think sleep was the biggest thing. And people ignore it, and you can adapt to low sleep. You can work around it for a while, but it's something that And interestingly, the sauna stuff kind of helped. I noticed immediately it kind of helped with sleep. So sauna and making sure to get at least 30 minutes of, cardiovascular exercise every day. That makes a big difference with sleep.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, your dog helps you with that.
Yeah.
Does it count? Does a walk count, or do you mean rigorous cardiovascular?
I think it has to be a little more rigorous, a little more vigorous.
Okay.
It has to be like a bike ride.
Yeah, that was a good chapter, by the way, the sleep chapter. I didn't enjoy reading it, but not because of the writing, but just because it was so in your face. Like, this is a very important one, and similar to you, at times, for me, it's more little kids that keep me up. But regardless, when I'm awake, then so I get it.
Yeah, I'm sure with a new child. Yeah.
Very good. Bill, that was a wonderful interview, and I feel really privileged that you spent over an hour with me. That's really generous of you. I wish you all the best. If people want to look you up, of course, I recommend both books. One called Hotwired, a great read, really entertaining at the same time. I listened to the audiobook and I like that. Also, the accents are actually mimicked as well, which I thought was great. Great idea. So it's a wonderful book. Outlive is also a must read for anyone who looks into longevity and especially health span rather than just lifespan. I think that's a really great read. Absolute staple for anyone looking into that. And if people want to find you, that's Instagram, Bill Gifford, and at Twitter as well. And you also have a Substack there.
That's right.
So thank you very much.
Yeah, Sebastian, great talking to you. Thank you. This is a great conversation. Great questions.
Thank you so much. Let you go, and all the best. And I can't wait for your next book. Actually, do you have something in mind, or you can't say?
Well, nothing nothing definitive, and I'll wait till I get a book contract, and then we can talk about it. But I'll just say that the whole process of writing Outlive, and especially Hotwired, just like my curiosity is just on fire. I mean, there's so much that we don't know, and so many interesting unanswered questions. And so I'm really excited about the future.
Yeah, thanks for all the work you have done. It really makes a difference to humanity. That's my belief, because the insights that you bring to light, I think, really helps, like public health, basically, like people and their health. So thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.